In this video, I'm going to show you how I've structured a trilogy in Scrivener and also how I go about exporting the book so it's ready to go in digital format for Kindle and iBooks and all those places. So one of the great features about Scrivener is you don't necessarily have to have just one book in a file. I have my entire trilogy all within one Scrivener account. And the reason I can do that is because when I go to export, I can select what parts that I want set up and export it. So I'll go into that in a second. But I have my trilogy broken out into seasons. So season 1 is the first book in the series, and it's a full-length novel. It's around 300 pages. Same with season 2 and season 3. And the way I have it set up is I have it broken out into episodes. So it's a 5-episode series. So it's basically like 5 novellas wrapped into a full-length novel. So if you're a word count person, season 1 is about 100,000 words, and each episode's around 20,000. And season 2 are a little bit shorter. They run around 88,000 words. So I have season 1, episode 1. If I click this drop down, I've got all the introductory stuff. So a simple title page, copyright, table of contents, although that's really, you can just ignore that. That's really just for the paperback. A little blurb, which I recommend for marketing purposes. And then another title, which is basically just a title page. Now, it's a little bit confusing with Scrivener deciding whether you want to use a text document or a folder. Honestly, I don't know if I've set this up absolutely perfect. So you can take this for a grain of salt, but what I have done I know works, so I'll just show you what I've done so it can help you. So each of my chapters, basically it's just the folder. It doesn't have any text documents underneath it. So if I click here, it's a folder with nothing else in it, and this is the text of the chapter. And it just goes right down the list until the end, where I have a simple to be continued page and an afterword. Now, the reason I have it set up like this is I used to publish each episode one at a time. So if you are not going to do this, if you're just going to publish the whole novel itself, you can pretty much ignore this end and afterword for the first episode. Obviously, the first part of your book, you'll want to have the copyright and the blurb and stuff like that, but you won't need the end and the afterword until the very end. So I have it at the end of each episode, but you would really only need it at the end of the novel. So it would be right in here, because this is, let me just close this so I'm not confusing you. So this is my entire book, and then here's the end and the afterword at the end. So this is my entire first novel basically summarized. So I've got each part of the book broken out. Now, if you have a regular novel that's not like this, you could pretty much not have all these episode folders. You would just have, your season 1 and then a bunch of folders. So chapters 1 through 30 or 50 or whatever. So I do this for each season, and it looks very similar. I've got episodes 6 through 10, and again, they're broken down. It's got the stuff in the beginning, the front matter, all the chapters, and then on the last chapter, okay, so the last chapter, it's got the end and the afterword. Okay. Now I have the third season, again, broken out very similar. So the second part of this video is how do I export this? Because it can be a little bit tricky. So I'm going to go to export, and here is all of the files that I've shown you. So here's season 1, all of the files, episode 3, 4, 5. Here's season 2, again, all the files, and then season 3. So let's look at these one at a time. The include is what you're going to actually include when you export. So as you can see here, I am getting ready to export the third book in my series. So it doesn't matter what I have over here, page break before as is. You can ignore that if the include is not there. So none of these are going to get included when I export. It's not until I get to season 3 where I have some of my exports. And actually, I kind of did this wrong. Okay. So this is episode, my season 3. And this is actually a really good teaching point because once I've selected all of the files that I want included, I move on to the second step, which is the page break. Now, what I do with the page break is I have a page break for every single chapter. It makes it look nicely formatted. If I didn't have the page break, you could have a chapter that is, when it ends the chapter, it's halfway down the page, and then immediately it says chapter 2, and then it starts all on the same page, which doesn't look very clean. Most books will, the end of the chapter will break off, and then you'll have to flip to the next page before you can see the next chapter. So that's why every single page that I want included, I also do the page break. Now, a little trick you can do, you can click these one at a time, which is a little bit of a nuisance. But if you're on a Mac, if you select the first one, go all the way to the end, you hit Shift and click, that's going to highlight everything. And then the next trick is, I believe it's Command. So I'm holding down the Command key and I'm clicking just one of these. Oh, sorry, it's not Command. It's Alt. The Alt Option key. Click there, and it's checkmarked all of these. So if you have a lot of these, I could have checked these one by one, and it would have been really annoying. But if you do what I just said, it makes it a little bit faster. So page break, I do a page break before every single chapter file that I'm including. Now here's where it gets a little bit trickier, and it's the as is. Again, I've maybe not set this up perfectly in Scrivener, but the way I do have it set up, I know works. What I do with as is, to take a step back, the magic of Scrivener is when you're writing within Scrivener here, the formatting really doesn't matter all that much. So I could make this 9 font and it looks really sloppy, and make this, well, maybe not bold, but it really doesn't matter how the formatting looks here, because when you go to export, that's when Scrivener does its magic and makes it in a nice formatting. So if I actually go back to my export, there's actually, let me do Kindle. Let me do EPUB. So this is where you actually select how it's going to look. So right here, I've got this kind of text, the body text. This is how it's going to look when I actually export. It's going to ignore all of this when I originally wrote it, the font, the size, etc. It's just going to use this. So that was a little bit of a side note. Now, this does come into play with the text files themselves. The way I do this is with as is, if you do as is, it actually is going to format it the way you want. So if I double checked as is for this chapter 1, it would make this font small, this large, this small, this large. If I don't have it check marked, it's going to default to that original formatting of whatever I set up under here. So what I do, again, is for all of my folders, which are my main chapters, I don't have the as is because I want it to have this default formatting. Now, what I do with the text files, I do have them check marked as is. So all of these text documents right here, and I don't have these included. So basically the front and the back matter is where I have the as is checkmarked. And the reason I do this is because my copyright page, I'll have a little bit further down on the page, so it's not up here. And I want it to look exactly alike. I want it to look nice and formatted towards the center. And you can't do that if you export by the default settings, which is my understanding. So I make sure I have the font that I want. And when I export my books, I use Garamond Regular 12. That's my default font. And I make sure in the text files that I use this font because I want it to look the same as these pages. So going back here, I make sure that these are selected as is, check marked, the title page, the copyright, and the ending stuff. But all of my folder chapters, I'm just going to have my default formatting, which is right here. Now you can go in and change this however you want. So if I click section layout, or excuse me, where's it at? Okay, so right here, fonts. Okay, so I don't have the setup right. This should be Garamond Regular 12. That is, actually, I'll take that back. That was correct. So Garamond I use for paperback novels, but for Kindle and the other formatting, I used the previous one. So once I've done all of this, I've gotten all of my includes, all the page breaks, and the as is, the way I set up, I'm ready to hit compile. And of course, I'm making sure that I use EPUB and Kindle whenever I want to do Kindle. You basically, once you get the EPUB set up the way you want, it pretty much will transfer all the settings and things like that to Kindle. So there's pretty much not extra work. Now, when you first get Scrivener, you do have to set up this Kindle Gen, which I'm using a different profile on my Mac, so I don't normally write and export from here. I usually have a different account, which is why it's not set up. In my other, it is. But once that's ready to go, I hit compile and export it where I need to go, and that's pretty much how it works. It'll look really nice. There'll be page breaks before every chapter, and you might have to export 2 or 3 times before you get it to work exactly right. If you follow exactly the way I've done it, it should be good, but you want to run through each one of your pages, see how the chapters end and transition, make sure all the fonts are the way you want. And I think if you use the setup, you'll be able to have a nice, clean, professional export for your digital book, so it's ready to go in iBooks and Kindle.